Hi, welcome into my studio to my new oil painting demonstration, and this time it's a bay scene. So before I get started, let me show you my easel and go through what you're actually seeing on screen at the moment. Now this is quite a dark, dramatic scene. It's all about the lighting. It's not really about details, and so I'm going to hold back on the details what I would normally put in and really concentrate on getting that dramatic lighting effect. So right in the center of the picture of my easel, you can see my canvas is stretched. It's already primed when I buy it, and what I've done is actually tone the central part of it a mid-tone neutral grey. Now the reason I do that, as I mentioned on lots of my videos, especially my pastel ones, is so that I can judge much more easily the lights and the darks. So if you imagine this, that I wanted to put down the paints of the dramatic highlight on the left side of that large female bear as we're looking at the photo top left. That wouldn't really show up on white, but because I've got the grey in there, when I put down those light tones, they're going to show up really well. When I've put down the dark tones, they are going to show up well also. Bottom right hand corner, you can see my palette. It's a glass palette. I show how I make those very easily on my YouTube channel. And all I've done is printed out a piece of paper, grey, and I've taped it or stuck it to the back of the glass fronted palette. That just makes everything kind of the same tone, where I'm looking at the canvas that's a mid-tone grey, the reference photo with the colours pulled out, and my palette as well. It means that when I mix on my palette, the colours will look and behave the same way when I put them actually onto my canvas. So I'd advise everybody or anyone that's struggling a bit with colour or want to make it really easy, and I do this myself after 20 years of oil painting, really makes things much more easy to do, to actually follow this type of procedure and keep everything roughly the same toned colour. Now this is a photo I've took that shows the stage I'm going to get to by the end of this video, and I just wanted to point out to you, even though I'm using expensive video recording equipment, it's never showing it as punchy and as vibrant on subjects like this that are really extreme as you are seeing on screen compared to what they are in real life. So I wanted to show you this so that you can see actually how punchy I'm really painting it. So let's get started. Here I've got a portion of my reference photos from wildlifereferencephotos.com, and I've zoomed right in for you guys to really be able to see just the head that I'm going to work on in this first section. I've got my drawing. If I go through the procedure of what I did with my canvas, just so I'm starting to block in on the screen at the moment. Got my white canvas that's already primed white, so I could paint straight on it. On top of that, I used acrylic paint just to make this kind of a mid-tone grey. I then transferred my image. I used a white graphite paper because the white shows up much better than black would. So even if I've done a drawing on some paper, done it freehand, I would still do this transfer method. It means I'm not erasing at all on my canvas. I don't want eraser particles and things like that on the canvas, so I always want that drawing to be accurate. I then took a permanent pastel and pencil fixative and I sprayed that lightly over that transferred drawing, because if I didn't, as soon as I start applying the oils, it'll all dissolve and wipe off, and I want that drawing to stay in place. It's not essential to spray it, but I find it a little bit easier. The brand I used was Winsor & Newton, but virtually all the art companies sell a pastel pencil fixative, and you want a permanent one, not a temporary one. So I'm starting off here putting the nose in. I could have started anywhere really, but to me I like to get at the beginning something very dark in place early on. The nose is the darkest section here, so it made sense to do that. And I also then like to get a very light section in, if that's, you know, in this area, if there's something very light, I like to put that in fairly early as well. And that gives me the wide tonal range. So when I've got something very light and very dark, it makes it easier for me to judge the mid-tones as well. So all I'm doing, I'm using a small flat brush. You can use a synthetic brush or a bristle brush, doesn't really matter. But even in a detailed area such as this, I haven't just gone straight in with little round brushes. I'm still using quite a large brush for the size of the area. Now I like to keep that reference photo really close as well. I mentioned that also on lots of my videos. The closer you can get it, the easier it is to judge the accuracy of colors and tones. Now what you will notice on the right hand side, my drawing looks a bit lopsided, and that's just a perspective of the video camera. I can't put the camera right where my eyes and where my head is, so I've got to go slightly to the side, even though I paint at an angle to try and give you guys the best viewing angle, the most accurate. It's still slightly distorted, but you can guarantee the drawing is the same. So I'm just using a bit of a smaller round brush just to tidy up the shape of the nostrils. And because I'm zooming in so much, I'm not showing my mixing palette. I've got a full video showing exactly how I mix colors, how I match colors, and it's showing the palette all the time on my Patreon channel. That's the way to learn to mix colors, not to see me dabbing in one color and dabbing in another, because you will never ever learn color mixing that way. So if you want to see and learn how I simplify my color mixing and how I match accurate colors, check out that video, because that's all you really need to know about subduing colors, matching colors as well. So that nose is coming out quite accurate. I'm squinting sometimes as I'm looking at my reference photo. I'm concentrating on the major masses, the major shape and form. Now I've got the dark of the snout in. I'm going to start working my way out from there, judging the colours against that blue tone. And a handy tip when you're doing a subject is to actually, on your palette, mix up, take your time and start mixing up a few of the major colours that you're going to be putting in, you know, within the next, say, half hour. I use alkyd oil, so they will start to go a bit tacky after about 30 minutes or so. But I can make up, you know, fairly large mix of, say, this area that I'm working on around that muzzle. And then some of the browns I'll start working on along the right hand side, so that your main mix is actually quite accurate and you've concentrated on getting that right, rather than just starting to apply paint straight away and adding little bits of paint to adjust here and there as you're going along. It's nice to have something at least that you know is quite accurate, something you've checked against a reference photo. Now the beauty with oils is that we can work wet in wet, so if I'm blending an area as I just did, I can put that base colour down and then start laying lights or darks on top, just making slight adjustments. And because I'm going to not be putting in too much detail on this painting and concentrating more on the colour, I'm being a little bit more accurate with my brushwork with the colours and tones, because I'm not going to be putting as many layers on top. Normally I'd get the undertone done quite rapid. It wouldn't normally be that accurate because I know I'll be putting layer upon layer upon layer as I'm building up fur texture and details. But this one, as I mentioned, is mainly about the colours. So I wanted to go quite accurate. So I'm keeping that looser, wet and wet blended appearance, that more spontaneous look to the painting rather than a very detailed one. So I'm taking my time that bit more on this first layer. And now I've got the main part of that right hand side of the muzzle done. I'm going to work out from that. I'm going to start to apply the fur texture using my brush mainly in that fur direction. And I'm going to start laying that in wet also. Now the eye in this painting is really small. It's not paying, or it's not becoming really a big centre of interest at all, but I need to get the placement accurate. So I've just dotted in the brown of the eye. Now I've selected a smaller brush and darker mix just so I can start to put in the dark area around the eye. It's all about getting just the position right, not worrying about highlights and colours of the eyes. The real centre of interest is the left hand side as we look at that reference photo, all those colours, those punchy, very vibrant colours. Everything else is subordinate to that. But even saying that, eyes have got to be in the right place, otherwise they're going to look a bit strange and odd. And I know we're looking at the perspective a bit off on my painting and on the reference, but it's worth taking the time, get the eyes in the right position. Now this is where you would not normally see me using a tiny little brush, and well, I'd call this tiny. I know some people would go down and use something with just a few hairs on, but this is about as small as I go. And you don't normally see me doing this at this stage, but as I said, I'm working a lot more wet into wet and having a looser touch, a looser appearance to this painting. So I want to get the accuracy and some of the detailing in while the paints are still wet around, so I can blend in and keep that looser feel. There's not much need to do a lot more to the eye than that, because I can and I will come back in when I do that bit of refinement later on and make any adjustments needed. So that's all blocked in quite quick, and now I'm starting to put this highlight in. I said I wanted to get it in at a fairly early stage, so I'm using titanium white. I've got a small amount of Winsor yellow in there and some orange as well, just to warm that mix up slightly. But you can see what I mean now about how essential it is to get that mid-toned canvas. So if you're doing pastels and mid-tone paper, this would not show up at all on white canvas. It wouldn't look white. And then you can really get the tones and the colors completely out, because you've got nothing to judge it by. You haven't got a dark or mid-tone to judge the highlight that you're putting on by. So you can see it's really essential, especially when you've got something with extreme light in and a dark side to a subject and a light side to a subject, which I like to do fairly frequently in my paintings and drawings, to have that drama of the light in. It's really important to me to use a mid-tone underlayer, mid-tone canvas or mid-tone paper. That's the critical part rather than the colour. You can see I'm starting to put some of the warmer colours in next to it as well. Now I've got that light in place, and that's all I really need to put in. I've got the dark of the snout. That helps me judge how warm I can make this left hand side, judge those colours more accurately. So now I'm just going to start blocking in those warmer tones and the browns and start working on this left hand side of the head. So that's the basics down of the actual head itself. I can work on top of that now, boosting the colours. I'm not going to really start working on any of the texture really in any detail. I will come back in and do that more on a second layer. So I'm working a bit darker than I want the final result to be, because I will layer those on top. Now obviously the paint will dry overnight and I won't get that wet into wet effect. But what you can do once it's dry, if you're using alkyds, if you're using standard oils, it's going to take a lot longer to dry. But if you're using alkyds, you can just then get something like the M. Graham Walnut Alkyd Medium and just put a small amount of paint thinners in the odorless thinners, or even use it neat, and just brush a little amount over the top. Use a kitchen tissue and very gently wipe most of that off, and that'll give you a slick surface to work on again. Test a little area to make sure you're not going to wipe your paint off, to make sure it's actually, that first layer is dried enough. And then you've got that feel again then of painting wet and wet, and also it'll bring any sunken colours like the darks, browns and the blacks, which are normally the ones that sink in and lose their punch. It'll bring those back and be more contrasty and vibrant, just as it was when you initially painted them. So as you can see, I'm starting to enhance and work on that brightness. So now I've got that some of the accuracy of the colour on the left hand side of the head as we're looking at it. Now I'm going to come in, start to add just a suggestion of this highlight on the side, and I'll go a bit more detailed around that muzzle. Really punch up that light to give that bright left sunlit effect. Goes a little bit brighter on this corner on the edge. I'm squinting as I'm painting it. Need to get a lot more in here. I'm using quite thick paint, virtually no thinners at all in there. Not using any mediums for this painting. It's just odorless thinners if the paint doesn't come from the brush, but I'm trying to keep it quite thick so it is still nice and opaque. And I can use this brush as well to blend the edge, just lightly blending one colour into another. That's the benefits we got when we do oils, and if you have watched any of my other videos, you know I keep mentioning how similar pastels are to oils, because I can do this blending with pastels, and I would do this painting in exactly the same fashion. If you're watching this and you're a pastel artist and you're not interested in oils at all, you can still watch it, because this is exactly how I would have done it in pastels. It's just, instead of using a brush, I would have used my pencils and pastels, but the layering, the blending, the technique is really very similar. So you can still see exactly how I would have done it in pastels, and then when you're watching pastel videos it works the opposite. So if you're only interested in oils, you can watch those and still see exactly how I would have built it up in oils. So I'm just going to carry on now, adding lighter and lighter tones and really making this area nice and punchy and colourful. Okay, so I think that's starting to look more accurate. It's starting to get that brightly sunlit effect. It's looking a bit more real. Everything is still wet on there. Remember, this is still the first session of painting. That stick I'm resting on, some marl stick, just a little bit of something like 1.5 inch by 1/4 of an inch with a bit of t-shirt material rolled up on the top, and I've been using this for, I think, probably 15 years, and that's stabilizing my hand so I can have some more accuracy when I'm doing these brush strokes. So just put a bit of the detailing in. I can come back, add some more punchy colours on my second session if I want to. All depends on how punchy I really want it, how dark and moody I want it as well. So I may do mine a little bit darker than the reference photo. So now I'm just going to carry on working out from the sections I've done already and continue with this underpainting stage. So I've just zoomed out. I'm going to work a little bit on the leg going down, perhaps a bit on the body towards the right. Same process, larger area, so larger brush. Going in the third direction again, all still that same first painting session. So I've got the basics of the colours, the basis in there. I can work on top now. It's ideal. Everything is still wet, so it all blends easily. It keeps that soft effect that I want. Don't want very harsh lines. The only things that's really quite harsh with the fur is around that adult's head. Everything else is quite soft. So that's where working wet into wet really becomes an advantage. just folded my reference photo so that I can get it even closer. Remember I said that the reference photo generally looks a bit brighter and a bit more punchy on the videos compared to the painting. Don't know why, it's just the way it actually records. You can see I'm trying to get some of these darker tones in now. Then I'll come back in and put some of those more vibrant colours on. And they'll just sit on top of it. Still all that first painting session. So not real details as such, just that suggestion. And I've got my arms out quite stretched while I'm painting this, so that I'm sitting back from the canvas, so that I'm not really head against it and getting obsessive with the detailing. I'm actually sitting back as far as my arms are stretched really most of the time, so that I can just take in the important parts, not all tiny detail. I need some detail in there, but it doesn't need to be very refined. And now I come in again and really start to punch the highlights up, where the edge lighting is really catching this left hand side of the fur as we're looking at the photograph. And I'll come back in, I'll refine this again, but I just want to make sure I capture that appearance of extreme light on the side early on. Really thick paint again. So now that I've started to add a lot more of the warm tones, I'm able to judge it better. You can see it's starting to look much more punchy, starting to look a lot hotter with the light coming in. Morning light, I assume, low down on the scene. I put that little bit of black in on the, or very dark on the cub, just so that I could judge this edge colour and the lightness, and I could blend into it a bit. And I'll be working and starting to do a bit on that cub quite soon. I think you can really see the thickness of the paint I'm putting on there. I want to keep that opacity. If I thin the paint, it'll start to become a lot more transparent, and then I need to add more and more layers. I don't want to do that, so I want to keep that paint nice and thick. Okay, time to make a start on the cub. It's all about tones with this. I need to get the lights and the darks just right to give that body that three-dimensional shape and form to it. As you can see in the reference, it's slightly blurred out as it's receding into the background. That makes sense because the background is so blown out, so blurred out. You obviously got to have some form of blur gradually happening. And what you see with a lot of amateurs when they paint in, they go from something extremely sharp to something extremely blurred, and that gives you a appearance of it being cut out and just pasted on top. I want to make these animals have a three-dimensional feel to them, so that means edges usually need to be soft as the form is rounded, and as things are going backwards in the scene, they gradually lose that sharp edge appearance, and that's what I'm going to concentrate on with this cub. So I'm going to build up like I did before. I've got a nice dark in first so that I can start to judge the mid-tones, and I'm just playing with my tones, playing with my colours, and then I'll add more accurate ones on top. So this is you know, it's the underlayer again. This is the next day now, so everything else is dry. Could have carried on. It was just after a little while of painting I like to have a rest, so give my arms a rest. And I don't like to do that when I'm kind of halfway through something, so I wouldn't want to stop on the cub at this stage. I'd like to be able to complete the underlayer of the cub in one session because I'm doing this wet on wet, blending and working into it. So I'm just going to carry on adjusting, adding little colours here and there, looking for areas that's warmer, lighter, just judging what I'm seeing in the reference and getting more and more accurate. You can see I've already put in a brown on that section of the leg or the shoulder, and then I came back and I put something a bit warmer on top because I could see it needed to be warmed up a bit. Now I've decided to put a small amount of the background in. It helps because I can then blend the edge and keep it soft on the cub where the two meet, wet and wet, and also it allows me to judge yet again the colours that I need for the cub, because the more things you can judge against, the more accurate you can get those colours. All this is going to be worked over again, but I just want to get something on the edge all the way around. So that's the right hand side pretty much done. I'll carry on around now onto the left hand side. I need warmer tones as I begin working on the left hand side, more pinks in there. The eye, no detail in there, just a dark mark. Obviously it's got to be in the correct area, but it doesn't need to be detailed at all, as you can see in the reference photo. The important part, the center of interest, I've said before, is that brightly lit side on the female. The cub is adding interest, but it's not the center of interest. So once again, squinting my eyes, just looking for the major shapes. Okay, so that's some major shapes really of the cub. I can see areas that need to go a bit darker, areas that definitely need to go a little bit lighter as well. Not much detail on this section. This is where that blending once again is making much easier work. And because this paint is quite thick, I know it can come back on top even when it's wet and start to add some of these warmer tones on this left hand side and that highlight towards the side of the muzzle. That's what's going to make it all look more realistic, more three-dimensional again. So now everything's quite soft. Now I'm looking at the more intricate parts. I'm looking at the subtle shade differences, the subtle color differences as well. It's pretty much, it's not an underlayer as I would normally do, as I mentioned, but it's certainly not its refined or finished stage at all yet. So I will come back in, I'll adjust colors on the next level, but what I'll keep in mind is I want that looseness of this painting. So rather than keep pushing for more refinement, more accuracy, more detail, I'll come to a decision earlier on that that's it, that's all I wanted to say about this piece. It's all about the lighting, and when I get to that stage, that's when I'll stop. And you see, even just little marks here and there, all of a sudden is starting to come alive a bit more, starting to get more accurate. The brain really does fill in a lot of the details. It knows what's supposed to be there, so you don't have to put every little detail in to make something look realistic. Darker in this section. When you're playing lights against dark, if your dark is not dark enough, then the vibrant areas or the bright areas won't look as bright. Now I want to keep this top edge nice and soft and quite fluffy looking. Got to have a bit of this rim light around there, because the cub's being influenced by the same light, of course, that the mother is. So we need some of this around the edge. So I'm quite happy with that to leave it at this stage, the first video. I'm happy how that young cub has turned out as well. The lighting looks quite realistic on there, especially when I'm sitting back from a distance. If you're watching this on a large screen, you've got to remember that the painting is only something like about 16 inches wide, so you've got to keep that into consideration as well. So I hope you've enjoyed part 1. Part 2, I'll continue blocking in the rest of the mother and possibly get some of that background done as well.